Black Myth Wukong has gotten some pretty awesome news recently, with the game now confirmed to get some DLC in the future, along with insider reports claiming that 2 additional Black Myth games will be following the DLC. We've already discussed that in previous videos, but interestingly, we got word of a fascinating feature found within the game's files that is leaving some players wondering if this particular mode could be fully realized in the upcoming DLC. We're diving into that, plus some more insight into the success of the game and what it means for the future of game science. Plus, we'll cap off the video by looking at some of the cut content in Black Myth Wukong that may make its way into the game in its future DLC updates. If you're enjoying Black Myth Wukong so far, let me know by smashing that like button and comment below what you'd like to see in the upcoming DLC. Now, let's get to it. Alright, Black Myth Wukong is absolutely slaying the game, with more than 18 million units of the game having been sold worldwide, having reached unseen levels of engagement on concurrent Steam players for a single player title, and selling millions of copies on the PS5 in China that the nation is now facing a shortage of consoles. Thanks to the recent Bloomberg article that we went over just a few days ago, we now know that Game Science is looking at developing some DLC for Black Myth Wukong, and while it may take a year or two until we finally get to play it, the studio is now sitting on a massive pile of cash that continues to grow with each passing day. As mentioned in the Bloomberg article, we now know that Black Myth Wukong had a budget of $70 million, and with a development time of 6 years, the game struck gold and has earned over approximately $800 million in revenue. So needless to say, we know that Game Science not only has the talent, but a significant budget to allocate to this upcoming DLC that can really make it special. With Chinese gaming industry insider Lunatic Ignus reporting that this DLC will be completed before Game Science moves on to their next game, Black Myth Jiangziya, the second game planned for a Black Myth trilogy, fans have been speculating what kind of DLC might hit the title, and well, some Chinese gamers who have looked into the title's files found an interesting discovery that sheds light on a mode that was being worked on early into the title's development that was ultimately cut. This mode that a certain player found was a mode that featured online multiplayer. Now, have you ever wanted to play Black Myth Wukong cooperatively with a buddy? Well, interestingly enough, a player was able to unearth a file within the game that sheds light on an online mode that Game Science was apparently working on during the earlier stages of development for Black Myth Wukong. Unearthed by YouTuber Outrageous Dongchai, the content creator goes deep into the coding of the game, revealing that such a mode does indeed exist, albeit it was hardly worked on and was likely scrapped in favor of creating a solely single-player experience. Mind you, this entire video is in Mandarin, so I don't have much to extrapolate here, but some comments have shed light that this mode was likely scrapped early into the production of the game, with others mentioning that Game Science may have worked on the mode to see if their development could support such functionality. The files said to be found within the multiplayer mode consist of creating and joining multiplayer lobbies, role configuration, and other multiplayer setups. If you'd like to check out Outrageous Dongchai's video, I will have it linked in the description. Now that we know that DLC is underway, some are speculating if online functionality may make its way into the title. Seeing as the game has been tremendously successful and continues to grow with positive word of mouth, some online functionality would likely continue to grow the game, extending the title's life perhaps further than some DLC expansions could. We've seen tremendous work done on Wukong's transformations that would honestly be pretty cool to see another player take the form of, in addition to perhaps having the second player taking on the role of Zhu Bajie, as this character is present for a decent number of the game's boss fights. That's just a thought, although I'm sure if Game Science were to implement a fully functional online mode, that there would essentially be 2 Wukongs teaming up, but it's pretty fun to think about the possibilities that could happen in a hypothetical multiplayer mode. Now, in my honest opinion, I don't necessarily think that Game Science is considering implementing an online mode, whether it be in a cooperative or competitive format, akin to the ones we've seen in the FromSoft games from Demon's Souls all the way to Elden Ring. While it would be kinda cool to be able to play with a friend and request the assistance from another player for boss fights, and even go at it in PvP via invasions or standard 1v1 matches, I think Game Science is likely interested in maintaining its focus on further expanding the game's content with its tried and true single player offering. Now, be sure to let me know what you think about this file containing multiplayer in the comments, and whether or not you'd like to see Black Myth Wukong receive some online or multiplayer functionality in the future. But I think Game Science focusing its time on expanding the game with meaningful content like extra chapters containing more areas, characters, and stories from Journey to the West that weren't explored here in Black Myth Wukong would be in the studio's best interest. Speaking of such things that were cut from the game, we can actually see a decent number of areas and boss encounters that were ultimately cut from the final release of the game. This is where I'll put up a courtesy spoiler warning for those who haven't played past Chapter 1 of the game, as certain locations will be discussed going forward. Here are but a few things that I was able to find going through older trailers that pertain to a number of cut boss fights. First, we have this towering foe here amid some burning trees in front of a structure commanding jolts of electricity from his outstretched arm. The background here looks a bit like the last part of Chapter 1, don't you think? Moving on, it looks like this towering, winged, spear-wielding behemoth was a boss that was ultimately cut from Chapter 3. Now, Chapter 3 is such a massive area as it is that perhaps Game Science wanted to trim it down a bit in order to lessen its sprawling landscape, but nevertheless, this boss definitely did not find its way into the final release. Now, what's really interesting is all this stuff that seems to be from Chapter 2 that we can see represented in the older trailers that didn't find their way into the final release. While Chapter 2 is very large, something you can say about pretty much all the chapters, these locations shown on your screen ultimately were cut. That includes this massive towering boss creature here that was shown heavily in the game's promotional material in the years leading up to the release of the title. So I'm really curious to see what could happen to these intricate boss designs and locations that ultimately didn't make their way into the game. Also, from the very early footage, remember this? Yeah, this is the one where Wukong is up against 100,000 Celestial Court generals in what almost resembles Dynasty Warriors-like gameplay, where the player is literally just mowing the lawn here with all these generals getting knocked around. But nevertheless, this moment did not make its way into the game. This list could honestly go on and on, as there are many creatures, boss fights, and areas shown in the numerous trailers throughout the years that never made it into the final release, so potentially some of these designs and locations could be further worked on and implemented in the future DLC coming to the game. Now, out of all these bosses and locations that were cut from the final game, which ones would you like to see in future DLC? While having a brief appearance in the game, Ignus the Wise did mention here that there were files that suggest that the Bull King may be playable or be a boss fight in future DLC. And seeing as he is a major character in Journey to the West that wasn't featured much here in Black Myth Wukong, it would be pretty cool to see him explored more in future DLC. And well, the same can be said for so many characters here, like following up on the fate of the Fourth Sister, introducing prominent characters like Jade Emperor and Nerja, both of whom were hinted at hitting the DLC, etc. Regardless, Game Science is cooking, and with all the success and money generated from the game's sales so far, the good news is that this DLC is going to be well worth the wait if the main game is anything to go by. The bad news is that we are likely a couple years away from getting our hands on it, but if you'd like to learn more about exactly which characters may be featured in the DLC and which Black Myth games are likely to follow after Black Myth Wukong, catch me over in this video as we dive deeper into the insider information. And that's all I got for you. I look forward to seeing you real soon in the next one.